Next up, we have Michelle McDaid, who's the founder at The Leading Place. She's going to be talking to us about leading with EI, so especially in the context of the age of AI. So it's EI in AI. Thanks very much, Michelle. Over to you.
I'll just give a bit of an intro. So my name is Michelle McDaid. As Andy introduced me, I am the founder of The Leading Place. I have over 25 years experience leading and scaling tech teams, software engineering teams. I set up The Leading Place because it had an impact from a gender representation perspective and also a trust and psychologically safe, creating trusting environments and high trust environments and psychologically safe environments. And I wanted to have that impact on a broader level. So I set up The Leading Place, and my mission is really to help companies to create environments where everyone can thrive, those environments where people can be at their best. I'm very passionate about tech being a place that's inclusive and that we have workforces that represent the world that we serve and the customer bases we serve. So, emotional intelligence, back in the past, we talked about IQ a lot. And when emotional intelligence was talked about first, it was, maybe more of a soft skill. And as Andy mentioned, it's not really seen as a soft skill now. And it's been shown through multiple research that actually EQ or EI is more impactful from a success perspective. And it's also, when we think about how tech leaders, the world that we're working in now, there's so much change. It's an absolute constant. We AI is transforming how we work, and in order to thrive, we really need to be able to be strong from an emotional intelligence perspective, and to be able to connect and empathize with the people that we work with, and lead with EI. And it helps us to be able to create environments where, we've got high trust, and psychological safety was shown by Project Aristotle as being the number one determinant of a high performing team. And sometimes when people talk about psychological safety, they say it sounds like, it's a nice to have, but if you want to have innovation and creativity, it's an absolute must. If you're interested in this topic, and I guess you are if you're on this call, um, a book that I recommend is Emotional Capitalists by Martin Newman. He's the creator of the ECR report, Emotional Capital Report, which is used by a lot of companies to measure emotional intelligence. And he says the ability to recognize and respond thoughtfully to our emotional experience is the most critical factor determining our success. So you can be absolutely brilliant at what you do, really strong technically, but if you don't have the emotional intelligence to actually you won't be successful. And when we think about, how AI is actually increasingly becoming, there's so many things that it can do now, and as the time goes on, it's becoming more and more capable. Um, it's changing how we work, and it actually needs us, no matter what our AI strategy is, we actually need to review all our processes, and we need to be able to, because whatever we're doing, we can be sure that people that we're interacting with are using AI. So we need to actually just review and make sure our processes are actually working now. And one thing that comes to mind for me is, when in colleges, a lot of the time, the processes haven't fully been updated, and students are being told not to use AI. But when they come in to the workforce as a software engineer, they are being told they need to use it. So we need to actually be collaborating with people that we rely on to actually understand what our needs and what their needs are around AI. Um, we we can see there's so many areas that AI actually surpasses human capability and capacity. But there are areas where humans still have the edge. And some of the things that come to mind would be critical thinking, sense making, and human skills. And Carol touched on the different dimensions of emotional intelligence, but empathy is one of the core components. And the human skill set is going to matter more and more for leadership in the future. So when we think about where, there's sensitivity to emotional nuances, it's really, really important that we are tuned into this. Howard Gardner talks about intrapersonal intelligence. So that's the ability to understand ourselves, and then interpersonal intelligence, the ability to understand and interact with others. And as tech leaders, we have a lot of responsibility in this space around AI ethics. We also need to make sure that we're not coding bias into the systems we create and we're responsible for. And we need to code empathy into the systems. So if you think about the people that are actually involved in creating the future, it's really important that they develop emotional intelligence. And it is something that we can develop and we can improve on all the time. So, as I mentioned, there's a few areas where humans have the edge over AI. Emotion. So, that is things like persuasion, self awareness, storytelling, complexity. So, when you think about dealing with what's called wicked problems, complex problem solving, sense making are things that come to mind. And then physicality, actually being physically present, and also then creativity. So, human skills, the imagination, creating something new, are all things that we can tune into. When I started my career, we were told to leave our emotions at the door. We were told we need to be professional. We need to have a different self in work than outside work. And a lot of people now would talk about how important authenticity is. Um, but it is, there still can be this thing around emotions in the workplace where, maybe somebody is described as too emotional. There can also be gender differences. So, if a woman gets upset, for example, that might be seen as weak or they're unstable. But a man who shouts and loses the run of himself may be seen as passionate. So it's interesting just to check ourselves when we're judging people. Um, women we can be more intolerant of some emotions. They're all emotions, but we may be more tolerant of some emotions in the workplace. And our emotions are there for a reason. They're there to tell us. Tell us if something is good or if there's something off. So we do need to pay attention to them. But I do, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to have curiosity over judgment. So sometimes people may be in survival zone that we're dealing with, and really you can't have a rational conversation if somebody is in survival zone. It's very hard to communicate well. And this could be due to stuff that's going on in the workforce, in the workplace. There's so many layoffs. There's a lot of stuff going on that can be challenging for people, but it also could be things that they're dealing with outside of the workplace. So I think asking questions rather than jumping to assumptions can be helpful, but also people can get triggered into survival zone. So, like a trigger is an event, it's a behavior or something that consistently prompts a negative feeling or reaction. So, it's really helpful as a leader to be tuned into what triggers you. I've worked with people in the past that I would have noticed, okay, they're always triggered when that word is mentioned or when this thing happens. And then you're able to actually get ahead of it. But really, as leaders, we need to be tuned into the things that trigger us. And we may, and if you may know this already about yourself, but if you're not sure, you can do things like do a trigger journal, note the things that really send you into orbit. Or look for patterns, and then also seek feedback from people, because you'll see maybe one person will tell you something, but if you see a trend, you'll see that this is a thing that happens to you, and then you can take action. One of the things I love from the Energy Project, they talked about buy time. Whatever you feel compelled to do, don't. So sometimes we are like so impassioned. Yes, I have to say this thing. Actually, maybe don't. Maybe pause. And there's a good advice to sleep on it. When we feel like we're getting really angry about something. Sorry, just one back. So, emotions in the workplace, they do, no matter what, they actually do have an impact on how employees' commitment, creativity, decision making, performance, and they actually affect the bottom line. So, whether we like it or not, that is a fact. So, we need to actually be tuned into the emotional dynamics that are at play in the workforce, in the workplace. And emotions shape behavior, they shape relationships, they play a part in key decisions. They do equal a value. So they will determine if people are going to work well with us, if people buy with us, if people will employ us, if they'll do business with us. And emotional capital is creates a value through engagement, commitment, loyalty, and goodwill. So it's really important just to be tuned into that and actually understand how important emotions actually are. And really, when you think about relationship skills, this is one of the key things that we need to be good at in the workplace. We can be doing a great job, but if we're not able to interact with people, they can't hear about it. They may not see the value. And really, one of the topics that I'm very passionate about is our social networks and being intentional about them. And I have spoken about that in at ShipaCon, and also I will be speaking about it in RebelCon. So there's a recording of my talk at ShipaCon on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn. So feel free to look at it. And when we think about, how we now have 5 generations in the workforce, and we have people are there's greater longevity, so we have to really think about how we are gonna sustain ourselves across longer careers, and one of the things that is important is intergenerational relationships. So, if we as, leaders, it can actually be really helpful to seek out reverse mentoring. So asking somebody who has just joined the company, who is at the start of their career, if they will be a mentor for you. It's amazing. Every time that I've mentored somebody, I have learned as much from that person as I feel they've learned from me. I think it brings you into another perspective, and it's also really helpful to think about how you can create that psychological safety for so that they can be honest with you. Um, the I've noted there the 100-year life, that book actually goes into this in a lot more detail. It's quite interesting. And this is something I came across when I was looking at the social networks. A hospice doctor in Chicago was looking at the widowhood effect and how if your partner dies, you have a 50% higher chance of dying in the next year. But he noticed that it went beyond pairs. It actually went to 3 degrees of separation. So he noticed that clusters of happy and unhappy people spread to 3 degrees of separation, and noted that emotions had a collective existence. So it's interesting just to think how impactful it can be and how your emotions affect others. And really what you take from that is, it's the ties between us that makes us better, and how it's really important to have a connected life. And I guess, if we think about there's a cost to maintaining relationships in the workplace or externally, but we get more benefit from it than the cost. I read an article recently by Brian Elliott, who does a lot of, he looks at a lot of research on remote and hybrid working and workplace culture. And this article talked about how heavy AI users were becoming more disconnected from their teams. And, as leaders, that's really important to be tuned into. I think I can understand why, because AI will tell us we're great and we don't need to, we're, we may be able to reduce conflict. It can be a bit easier sometimes, but it is going to have an impact on teams and how they perform if that continues. So it's just something to be tuned into. And another piece of research that I came across, I recently completed a master's in work and organizational behavior. And my thesis was on how tech leaders build and maintain trusting relationships in hybrid and remote environments. And it basically the research found that virtual work is perceived as more traceable, more formal, and more about efficiency. So when we come into an office, people expect that they're going to be less productive and they're going to spend more time engaging socially with people. But when we're working remotely, people don't feel that permission, and they will self-select and be selective about who they engage with. And the downside to that is, you may have more siloed thinking. You may have teams not talking to each other. So, as leaders, we need to be quite clear about why it's important to actually speak to people in other teams. When I was senior director of engineering in my last role, I would have intentionally set up calls with the VP of architecture, the VP of product, different areas to make sure that I was tuned in to what they were doing. And I felt that that was necessary. But if people think that they should only interact with the people where, from a tactical point of view, this may actually have an impact too. So when we think about, the pace of change has never been more frenetic, and leaders can't. They don't have all the answers. They can't have all the answers. And actually, if they think they can, that's an issue. It can end up killing innovation if we don't listen to the people within our teams. And, one of the core parts of motivation is autonomy. So giving people that space to be part of the solution. But when we deal with complex change, it is, it is actually, it threatens the nervous system sometimes to have so much uncertainty and unpredictability. And we can try to control it through excessive planning. We may freeze. We may find we don't know where to go, but actually leaning into our humanity can actually help us. And with the term VUCA would have been used a lot. BANI has been used more recently, where brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. But really, just highlighting how we are in an age of chaos where there's less structure, and structure is being created and recreated all the time. So it's just to understand that this is what we're the backdrop that people are operating in. And when we deal with change, like a lot of times people say people don't like to deal with change, people don't like change, but actually, really, people don't like imposed change. So we do like change. We change what we eat, we change where we go on holidays, we change what we watch. Our moods change several times during the day. So it's helpful to remember that as well. And always you can't always have people part of the decision making process, but even if when you can't, sharing the path to the decision can actually be helpful. And I also find, the concept of CIA: control, influence, and accept. So what can you control, what can you influence, and what do you have to accept or adapt is a helpful framework to think about. When we resist change, we end up making it harder for ourselves. And it's interesting. Carol was talking about responsibility. The word responsibility actually comes from response. So the capacity to respond rather than react, and your ability, your talent. So as tech leaders, we have a responsibility, and we can tell the story that is authored by ourselves. And being clear about where we're going and how we're getting there can be really helpful for people. And as mentioned already, it can be very challenging when you're in a CTO role, and it can be lonely. So when we have higher emotional intelligence, that actually can help us. And one of the things in a complex world is sense making. So, in the past, when we think about how leaders were expected to have all the answers, and when we implement changes, when we implement complex change, we need to be able to make sense of the world that we're operating in. And we've moved from that phase where leaders are expected to have the answers to leaders helping to make sense of the unknown, and now to co-creating sense, and that's between leaders and followers. So how well we work as a network can actually make a huge difference here. And I love this quote here. The most effective leaders are no longer the ones that have the best answers, but the ones that host the best conversations. So this is a fundamental part of being a good leader. And it is the sense making process is seen as fundamentally social. In a recent research, Gallup showed that the top thing that people need from leaders, trust is high, but number one is hope. Um, and really, when we think about it as leaders, leaders can cast a long shadow, and we need to be tuned into whether we are casting a positive shadow or we all know people, maybe ourselves, that are carrying trauma from past leaders that weren't great leaders. And what is the impact that we're having on people? If we think about the leadership shadow, it's this impact that we can have beyond what we in our current role. Um, so it's, what we say, how we act, what we prioritize, and how we measure. What do we reward? What are, sometimes we say things, but then we will have some nonverbal cues. There are certain words that we use, phrases that we repeat that send a different signal than the words that we're saying, maybe, or the message we're trying to get across. The example we set, what do we really care about? What are we prioritizing? And what do we reward? What are the measures that we look at to see to check performance? I've just shown this, the Patrick Lencioni five dysfunctions of a team, to show often I hear, like when I'm working with leaders, they will say, well, we just don't have commitment. We have a lack of accountability from the team. I'm really disappointed with the team. But often if you look at this, the basis is trust. So if you go back, you can't get to the higher levels without getting to so if you have no trust, if you have a fear of conflict, you can end up with lack of commitment and lack of accountability. The productivity of your team actually starts with you. So where it may be conscious or unconscious, people are following your cues. They're looking at the behaviors you have. They will mirror you. So if you want to improve your leadership shadow, some of the things you can do are around building trust and psychological safety, operating with transparency. When I did my research, the number one word that was used was transparency. Autonomy, reviewing your calendar to see what are you prioritizing, and then just having that continuous improvement mindset. So I'm going to finish off with a couple of questions to think about. As a coach, I love to ask questions, and I'm always gathering good questions. So one of the ones is from Deborah Ancona from MIT. What are you pretending to know when you could be asking better questions? And that really is around our ego. Do we know what our blind spots are? Who can you trust to ask questions to find out what your blind spots are? Do you know your triggers? What don't people tell you? What are they afraid to tell you? What strengths may go into overdrive? From positive psychology perspective, I believe we have strengths, not weaknesses, but our strengths may go into overdrive, and that gives us the power to pull it back. The other questions I'd ask are, who's not in the room? Who are you not hearing from? Whose perspective do you not have? Who's allowed to say what to whom or ask what of whom? And are you happy with the shadow that you cast over your team? Are you displaying the behaviors you want to see from your people? And just a couple of takeaways. So your ego is not your amigo. I love this phrase. I got it from Cy Wakeman, but I believe it came from somewhere else. Is your ego getting in the way? It's always helpful to ask, is this my ego? You don't and can't have all the answers. Whatever you think, information is being sugar-coated at each level before it gets to senior leaders. And employees need hope from leaders. And you have likely had more time to process change than others. So remember that you have, sometimes we can be judgmental of people not reacting badly, but understand that we have had more time usually as leaders. And then seek out reverse mentoring. I'm just leaving you with this. It's a tool that I created, how I like to work. And it's like a user manual, again, coaching questions. The feedback that I've gotten from the teams that have used this has been amazing. Like, it's actually led to a lot more trust being built and people being able to understand one another better and actually tolerate maybe more tolerant behavior. But really, it's a list of a few questions to think about, and it'll help your self awareness, which is the first part of emotional intelligence, but also if you how you interact with others when you share it with people that you work with. So that's it. I'd invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, follow the leading place on LinkedIn as well. And do get in touch directly if you have any questions or any follow on from what I've talked about. So I know we've got maybe a minute or two for questions as well.
Oop. There we go. Sorry about that. Hey, thanks very much, Michelle. That was great. A little bit of technical difficulty there. Fantastic. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions. Let's start with one from Marco. I read quite a bit about psychological safety. Hang on, let me bring it up on the screen. I read quite a bit about psychological safety, and I agree with your assessment that this is super important. But how do you actually build this in organizations that do not have it? That's a pretty big
Yeah, like
question.
the ideal situation is coming from the top, and you're going to be much more successful if that is the case, but that's not always possible. But you can build it in pockets and it starts to spread. So it is really about showing that it's safe to challenge, to question, demonstrating it yourself and creating that safe space where and encouraging more voices, and noticing how you respond when people maybe give you something that information that you don't like. Even taking a pause and saying, that's interesting, let me process that, thank you for sharing it. And no, just showing how you respond to negative feedback can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think leading by example, showing people what it feels to be like in a situation where you have a leader that's interested in their psychological safety is kind of the first step, really, isn't it? Yeah, good one. Okay, next up we have Kerry. How can you seek useful feedback if people around you might be too afraid to give it to you? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, start with psychological safety. But I think it's, one of the things I would ask, what am I doing well and what can I do even better? If you frame it like that, it can feel safer for people to say. I ran workshops within the product development teams in my last role because I could see we weren't open speaking as openly as I thought we could, and it would be better. And we talked about radical candor, that book by Kim Scott. And actually, the impact of not helping people to understand the impact of not being honest could actually cost somebody a promotion. It could cost them an opportunity if you know something that can help them to be better. But it's also, demonstrating that it is safe to tell you.
Yeah, very true. Okay, I think we've got time for one very quick one. Also, Kerry, how can you address poor EI in peers? Mm-hmm.
Again, like as I said, it's very hard for if the leaders don't value it, but the impact is, it'll have a short term, maybe somebody is a high performer, but that will have short term, benefits, but longer term impacts, and you'll end up losing key people if that is the case. So, it is really trying to promote the benefits of it, and helping people to understand that. But you need to get leadership buy-in, I think, if you're trying to change the way an organization is working.
Definitely. Thank you very, very much, Michelle. That was awesome.
Thank you.